Hello and welcome once again to Crazy Comics and Stories. It's me, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard, and we do not have Joe at the other end of the series of Tubes and Wires. No, this is a fill-in episode, one that I am recording myself because Joe takes vacation, Joe's and my schedule get weird, and we have not even had time to record a new fill-in episode since we used most of them up while he was out with his hip surgery. So, if you're listening to this, Joe and I were not able to record this week. Instead, on digital comics. That's right, I'm going to give a brief history of digital comics, how you should buy your digital comics, what to look for in digital comics, and so on and so on and so on. I'm also leaving room to edit in any sort of information that may have happened that Joe and I might not get to, and here it is. Well, Friday afternoon, while I was at work, all of a sudden my RSS feeds started burning up with the news that Dan Didio was no longer one of the publishers at DC. This means that the publisher at DC is now Jim Lee. No word on if they will be moving someone else to publisher, such as editor-in-chief or whatever his actual title is, Bob Harris, or if they're just going to have Jim Lee be the publisher. There is a lot we do not know about this. I only want to talk about it in terms of the fact that Dan Didio has been kind of the high muckety-muck at DC for quite a while. He was driving a new initiative called 5G that Joe and I have talked about in the past, where the characters such as Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne, some of the others will be aging out of their roles, and they have already started to plant the seeds for this in a number of books, including the new Wally West miniseries, and the Free Comic Book Day book was going to be setting this up in a bigger way. There have been rumblings that there are people in editorial and creators that are pushing back on this, but the launch was going to be in October, which is weird because normally they do their big launch stuff in September, because September is usually a month when sales go down. September and February are usually the lowest month for sales in comics. That's why you get a lot of the big events start in the summer and then carry over into September to try to bring people into the comic shops during months when they normally don't, like September. Online reaction has been mixed, with a lot of people wishing him well and being shocked by this, and some people doing what they always do whenever an editor-in-chief or someone in charge at comics is let go. They're celebrating. I remember... The first one I really remember was when Jim Shooter was let go. There wasn't much online, but a lot of comic fans that I knew, and in the proto-internet of message boards and such, they were like, yay, Jim Shooter's gone, yay! And then Tom DeFalco was in charge, and then when Tom DeFalco was gone, yay, Tom DeFalco's gone, yay! And then Marvolution, where they had 5 editors-in-chief. I don't think anybody knew what was going on when that was ended, but when Bob Harris was let go, there was a lot of, yay, Bob Harris is gone! And some of that was among comic creators at the time, one of which was Al Milgrom, who actually put his feelings in the background of a comic he was inking, and it got him fired, and they had to pulp the run, and he had to work for free to pay for it. When Joe Quesada got elevated, I don't remember a whole lot. Paul Levitz, I remember when he was let go or retired or whatever actually happened, because we never really know what happened. There are a lot of people upset because Paul Levitz, he stayed in the background. He did a few things like pulping executive at DC. And since then, whenever any big editor-in-chief is let go, there are people online who cheer, because there are people in life who cheer about any bad news. Me, I don't know enough about it. I know that DC has some problems. I know that they've had a number of editors quit in the last year or so. The shutdown, basically the way Vertigo was left to just kind of wither and die, was a problem because Vertigo used to generate a lot of money, not from the actual comics, but from the trade paperbacks and TV deals and such for the series that were created, and Vertigo was kind of left to wither and die. They now have Sandman Universe, which has sort of the same thing as Vertigo's non-creator owned stuff, and then Joe Hill's horror line seems to be kind of taking up what Vertigo did, just like Young Animal takes up what Vertigo did. I think the biggest problem DC has, in my opinion, isn't the monthly books. The monthly books still seem to sell about like they always did. It's the trade paperback and collected line. DC in the 90s and into the 2000s, that was a cash cow for them. Look at the archive line and how that line continued to sell. These were high-end books collecting older stuff, usually Golden Age, but they got into some of the Silver Age stuff, and they were just a cash cow. They were continuous sellers. Tons of paperbacks. It was DC ruled the roost, and kind of since the New 52, that has fallen off a cliff. And I think it's because before that, you could reasonably count that a series that was being reprinted, A, would continue to be reprinted, and B, it would still, quote, matter, unquote. And now they reshuffle continuity so much. I've heard that the New 52 trade paperbacks, people are putting them in dollar bins. They didn't sell. They sold a little bit, and then, oh, here's Rebirth, and the bottom dropped out of them. I have not seen enough information on their young adult line, but what I see in the sales charts is that they do okay. I also, if they're getting those books into Target and Walmart and Barnes & Noble, they'll probably sell pretty well. We've talked a lot about it in the past. The young adult money is where readers are going to come from and go. The Dev Patel Dogman book, the recent one, had a 5 million print run. His Captain Underpants line, which has now been picked up by another creator, still sells. And anybody who says the comics are dying needs to look outside the comic market. And I wonder if DC was moving well enough into that idea of we're moving outside the comic market, or if just the new owners at AT&T looked it over and said, no, we want results now. Back when AOL bought Time Warner, they looked over and anything that wasn't making immediate profit was jettisoned. And usually when a new owner comes in, that's what they do. I wonder if AT&T is looking at DC going, why isn't this making a ton of money? I mean, the Batman movies it make millions and millions of dollars, and the Batman comic only sells 100,000 copies. What's up with that? Joe and I are recording tomorrow, so we'll have more discussion on this, as well as other discussion of more recent news. And now back to the fill-in. So, digital comics. Digital comics are relatively new, as are ebooks. But when they were first talked about, it was usually PDF scans of comics on CD and DVD. But before that, in the 80s, there was microfiche. And if you don't know what microfiche is, come, sit, gather around the learning tree. Microfiche was a format where you would take a picture of a book, magazine, newspaper, whatever, and it would be tiny. They would fit 30 to 40 pages on a single kind of a 4x4 piece of plastic. And you would have a microfiche reader, which was really just kind of a personal projector. You would lay the piece of plastic down, move to the page you wanted to see. There would be a light underneath. It would project it and then make it larger through mirrors on a screen. And that's kind of how old newspapers and magazines were stored by libraries and publishers. And in the 80s, there were some people who actually did microfiche of old public domain comics, or comics that had gone out of, the publisher had gone away. But also there were some early Marvel. I remember you could buy Marvel Mystery Comics microfiche. They had ads in the Comic Buyer's Guide. They didn't much have ads in comics. It was mostly Comics Buyer's Guide. And you could actually buy a microfiche machine, which was a few $100, which is crazy when you think about it now. And the microfiche itself was pretty expensive. I remember they had like the first 10 issues of Whiz Comics for $49.99 on microfiche. But once you got to the 90s, they started putting out PDFs on CDs and DVDs. I actually have, right here, I have Completely Mad, which is a collection of all the Mad magazines on CDs. They later put it out as a DVD with a PDF reader on the CD, because not everybody had a PDF reader. Now, of course, PDF readers are everywhere because Adobe makes them free. But then they did some comics on DVD. There were comics on CD, but Marvel put out like Fantastic Four, the complete run, or Spider-Man, the complete run. I bought them because I thought they were cool, and it's, hey, I could get the entire run of the Fantastic Four for $50. Or then Joe and I talked real long time ago. I forget who marketed it, but they put out every Star Trek comic on a DVD. And this was the Gold Key, the Marvel, the DC, all the stuff that Wildstorm did up until that point, because all the Star Trek comics are owned by Paramount, and they licensed it out. So the Marvel stuff was okay. The DC Star Trek books were great. That was the best run of Star Trek comics. Excellent stuff. Especially early on, it was Peter David and Michael Jan Friedman who were writing them. You had Gordon Purcell and Pete Krause drawing them. But really, after Star Trek 2, DC got the license to do Star Trek comics and just did a fantastic job on those. They were excellent comics. The Gold Key stuff is legendary in how messed up it was. It was drawn by people in Italy who'd never seen the show. Some of the early issues were written by people who'd never watched the show. They just got kind of, okay, here are the characters, and here's the ships, and here's the gear. And they just kind of did standard science fiction stories using Star Trek characters. Later on, you had real early work by Len Wein and I believe Marv Wolfman. So those stories were better, but the art was still by people who'd never watched the show. But you could get the whole thing on a DVD, and I remember when it first came out, it was $100, and by the time Joe and I got it, they were selling it at Half Price Book and Magazine for $10. So that was the real early versions of digital comics. Also, once the internet became big, I tend to look at the internet before high-speed internet was available at home and after. Before, there wasn't a lot of comics available online. It really started around 98, 99, 2000 when high-speed internet started coming. And yes, there was comic piracy. We're not going to talk about that because don't pirate comics. Just don't. But there was public domain books available. And more people would scan the public domain books and make them available. And there are websites now out there like the Internet Archive and other sites. All you have to do is go to your Google machine and type in public domain comics, and you'll get a whole list of people who are making them available. Oddly enough, a lot of the Warren stuff is now public domain because that company went out of business, and while they copyrighted Creepy and Eerie, the names, they trademarked those, they did not do proper work to copyright the stuff after Warren went out of business. The Dark Horse reprints, those reprints are copyrighted. But if you look, the original stories are not. They're all public domain. And they're out there and available. A lot of the Carlton stuff that wasn't bought by publishers or even a couple of creators, a lot of that stuff has gone public domain. You can find reprints of that. A lot of stuff from the 40s and 50s is public domain. Be careful about public domain. Only go to sites like Internet Archive or other sites that actually research what has gone into public domain. Because there are a lot of people who, oh, well, you know, the early Superman stuff's public domain. No, it's not public domain. Public domain is a messy thing to know. It's also depends on the country. We've talked in the past how Conan the Barbarian, the real early stories in Europe, are public domain. Here in the U.S., Conan Properties has done a pretty good job of keeping them copyrighted. So that's why there was a comic company, I think it's ARG, I don't know. They were going to reprint some of the European Conan adaptations. And they said, well, you know, it's public domain over in Europe, so if we reprint it here, it's fine. And they got slapped with the cease and desist because, no, just because it's public domain somewhere else doesn't mean it's public domain everywhere. I think, the Oz novels, Tarzan is a great example. The early Tarzan novels are public domain, but the character is trademarked. So that's why I forget who it was. One of the publishers put out a comic, Lord of the Jungle, because they could not call it Tarzan, because Tarzan was trademarked, even though the novel they were adapting was public domain. But real early on, there were public domain comics available online. And I read a lot of them. When it first started, they were kind of clunky because it was PDFs, or you could only read it online. You would have to scroll down rather than going page to page to page. But since then, they've gotten better. There's a dedicated format for that called CBZ, which is a form of PDF that's basically made for reading comics. And I use, what is the name of the one that I use? Comic Rack. I use Comic Rack for reading those. It's a great program, but there are a lot of different programs you can use for reading CBZ files. Now, the big companies got into digital comics, and I was doing some research, and to me, it seems like it's just been, within the last 10 years or so. But Marvel was actually working on digital comics first with the CDs and DVDs. But Marvel Unlimited actually started in 2007, which surprised me. It's been around that long. And if I'm wrong, I apologize, but my research shows that Marvel Unlimited was unleashed upon the world in 2007, and they were selling digital comics on their website then. DC started doing digital comics with the New 52. So that was in 2012. And it wasn't soon after that that everybody was selling digital comics. There's not a lot of when they first started doing it, which is weird. You would think that even though that's pretty recent, there would be good records on it, but it's not. And I think a lot of it is because when they started it, there weren't a lot of people buying it. One of the first companies that started out selling digital comics, they weren't a comic publisher, they just were selling digital comics, was a company called Comixology. And they had contracts with a lot of the smaller publishers like Image and Dark Horse and Boom and IDW and like that. They eventually got bought by Amazon. They're currently owned by Amazon. They're kind of a separate company through Amazon. And Amazon itself now sells digital comics. They started doing that around the same time they started doing ebooks. And it's weird that you could buy your digital comics on Amazon and read them on your Kindle, but you can't put Comixology on your Kindle, and you can't read your Kindle stuff on Comixology. So you would think they would kind of blend that stuff. Marvel, starting around 2010, 2011, if you bought it was really when comics went to $3.99. Marvel said, okay, if you buy one of the comics, we'll give you a digital code so you can have the digital version of it too. And even in some of the big hardcovers, I hold in my hand, to redeem your free digital copy of Avengers vs. X-Men Companion, use the code below. You must redeem it by 5/1 of 2015. Well, I bought the book on discount long after that, like, 2019. The code still worked. So they didn't say, oh, no, we're not going to accept that. I think they were trying to get people to, hey, use this code. Don't let it just sit around and everything. But Marvel had the thing where, and you would peel up a little tab in order to get the code and type the code in. Marvel also at the time had Marvel VR, which was kind of a virtual reality thing where you could take your cell phone or tablet and kind of hold it over a panel, and something would come up. Usually it was something like an interview with the creator or some history on the character or stuff like that. They still have that available on those comics out on Marvel Unlimited, but I haven't seen Marvel VR in a comic in forever, so it must not have gone over well. Or they just realized that, not enough people are using it to put the money into it. Because I would imagine that, even though it's just, okay, here's the history of Porcupine. Or here's the inker explaining what they did. Or here's the writer explaining where this idea came from. There just wasn't a lot of call for it, and there was an expense to it because you did have to pay someone to write that up. You had to pay someone to put that information in. You had to pay someone to code it. If you're recording a video, you have to get that creator. I would imagine you have to pay them for their time. You have to pay for the production people, etc., etc., etc. So I think it was 3 years ago that DC started their DC Universe, which was mostly a streaming service, but they also had a comic component. And for the longest time, there were people who worked at DC who, when I would ask about it, they say, no, because of the profit-sharing contracts that people have, we won't be able to do something like Marvel Unlimited because... And you see this with some of the low-end reprint type stuff they did, like the DC showcases. There were some books they could not print as showcases without the creators signing off that they would give up certain amounts of their royalties, because in their contracts, if you reprint something, the creator is guaranteed a certain amount of money or a percentage. And for books like Suicide Squad, if they were to put that in a DC showcase, it wouldn't generate enough profit for the contractual obligation to be met, which is why they announced things like Suicide Squad as a DC showcase, and then it came out as a series of trade paperbacks, because they couldn't make the math work. There were also some creators, Dan Jurgens among them, who would forego that for those reprints, such as the Booster Gold showcase. Dan Jurgens specifically said that he had to sign off that, yes, I will take less than I'm contractually obligated to get so that that book can be printed. And what I was told was that the digital was the same way. There wasn't a way for them to work out, okay, people are paying this much a year, they've accessed this comic this many times, therefore this is your cut of the profit. So I do not know how they were able to get around that, but eventually they did. And there are DC Comics available on DC Universe now. Comixology also has a basically all you can read, where you pay this much and you get to read all of these comics. The thing about it is it's mostly limited to first issues or first story arcs. The issues that you can read rotate in and out. It's never a complete run. I have not signed up for that one because it seems like such a mess. Where it's, why would I want to read the first trade paperback worth of stuff and then have to buy all the rest if I'm doing this as an all-you-can-eat thing? Some smaller companies have digital subscription services. Comixology has a subscription service. Amazon does not have a subscription service, but you can sign up to be told when a new issue is coming out. So, as we talk about digital comics, I know that there are people who, I'll never use them, or people like me who like them. So I thought I would go over the pros and cons of a digital comic. Number one pro for me is organization and space. I have been collecting comics since I was 12. That's over 40 years. I have 40 years worth of comic books, trade paperbacks, hardcovers, etc. And I read a lot. I read a lot of comics. As you can tell by the podcasts I do and the information I have, I read a lot of comics. I've always, since I was 12, I wanted to read all of them. So, space, unless you have unlimited space, having tens of thousands of comic books. One, storage is an incredible pain in the ass. They take up a lot of space. And they take up a lot, it's hard to sort them. Back when my collection was smaller, every month or so, I would take a day. And it's okay, I'm going to sort comics. And I would sort them alphabetically and then numerically and then make sure to get all the books and then file them. And eventually it gets to the point where unless you have some sort of dedicated setup, you can't do that anymore because it's okay, I need to grab all of these boxes. And now, this box is full, so I need to take some out of this and move it into the next box. And that cascades down, etc., etc., etc. How many bookshelves do you have for your hardcovers and trade paperbacks? How much room do you have? Also, finding the old stuff. I've been thinking about the story in Marvel 2-in-1, where the Thing goes to England and teams up with some British heroes, and then Alicia gets infected and becomes a giant spider so that they can bring in Spider-Woman and blah, 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 blah. Digging that story out is a gigantic pain in the ass. However, digitally, it's easy to find. It's just Marvel 2-in-1. Oh, okay. There you go. It's easy to find. Takes less space. I have found for comics from at least the 60s and 70s, the reproduction is much, much better because the paper they used, especially by the time you get to the mid-70s, they were using the lowest grade paper they could. I still remember reading comics and seeing little tiny bits of wood because they were using the lowest grade pulp paper. You would actually see, this kind of less than a smaller than, kind of like 4 or 5 needles across, and maybe, an eighth of an inch. Eighth of an inch by an eighth of an inch. Oh, look, that's actual wood that didn't get turned into paper. I've talked in the past about how on 70s books, you can actually see what's on the next page through the page. And there are some pages where the bleed through is so bad that you would look at the art and go, oh, this is awful. And then you look at it either in a trade paperback or a hardcover or digitally, and the art is it's just beautiful. Just beautiful. but because the reproduction was so bad back in the 70s that you didn't like it. I love Gene Colan stuff, but I would always, on some books, go, wow, this isn't very good. And then reading the reprint, you look at it and go, oh, man, I was completely wrong about this because the stuff on the other side was bleeding through and making the page look messy. So there's a lot of that. The reproduction is better. It's easier to find. If you know what you're doing, it's much, much cheaper. You don't have to hunt for back issues if you want to find a back issue. Let's say you're reading something and, it refers to the Project Pegasus saga and Marvel 2-in-1, and you go to your local comic shop, they may not even have those back issues. And if they do, they're by George Perez and John Byrne, so the John Byrne ones used to be worth a lot more, now they aren't. The George Perez ones used to be worth a lot more, now they aren't. But if you're in a shop where they price it and leave it, it's going to be like that. They may not have the whole thing. You may have to go to 2 or 3 shops. Or you could go to Marvel Unlimited, look it up, and there it is. There were a lot of, this new issue of Batman that has Punchline. It's $35 the week it comes out, because people are selling it online for $45. Or you could go to Comixology and $3.99. Why? Because it's $3.99. Every issue is still in print. Go to Amazon. Every issue is still in print. Go to both DC and Marvel. They actually will sell digital comics through their site. Still in print, still cover price. You don't have to worry about back issue prices. You don't have to worry about things getting hot. And for me, I work 2 jobs. I'm not home a lot. So rather than throwing a hardcover or a trade paperback in my book bag, I can instead just throw in my tablet. And everything I own, as long as I have an internet connection, it's right there. It's on my tablet. Or I can download stuff on my tablet. And right now, I have so much stuff downloaded on my tablet that when I get caught doing an awake overnight, if I'm in a place where I don't have access to Wi-Fi, doesn't matter. I've got it on my tablet. I can read through it and stay awake at night, especially, if there's no Wi-Fi. No Netflix, no Amazon Prime, no Hulu, no WWE Network, none of that. And let's face it, pretty much once you get to 1 or 2 in the morning, they've got cable. Yeah, and it's all infomercials and crap that nobody wants to watch. So those are the pros. The cons, your digital comics aren't worth anything. They aren't. They're not worth a darn thing. You can't resell them. When I was a kid, one of the ways you would get your parents to quit throwing out your comics was to say, but they're worth money. We all know that that's bullshit, but still, there's no resale available. Joe talks about how he'll buy a comic, and if he doesn't like it, he puts it up on eBay and sells it, and he'll usually get most of his money back. So really, he's just kind of paying a rental fee for the book. Another con is you have to have electricity. And while you'll say, I always have electricity, I have been places where it's okay, my tablet's dying, I don't have a charger. I forgot my charger at home. Or, again, I don't have a Wi-Fi connection, so what do I do? Joe also talks about how, you get a big solar flare, it's going to wipe out all the digital stuff. I don't know if that's true or not, but there is that. There have been websites in the past where you buy things from, the company goes under, it's all gone. Everything you bought is gone. Amazon has the ability to remove stuff that you've bought. People who had ebooks have learned about that, where they have bought an ebook and then Amazon finds out that the publisher didn't have the rights, or there's some other thing. I remember real early on with Kindles, people who'd bought 1984 one day went and looked on their Kindle and it was gone, and it was some sort of rights fee. Or, for all we know, let's say Comixology, Amazon looks at it, goes, it's not making enough money. Pfft, gone. And before you say that could never happen, Vertigo didn't make enough money. Gone. Outside the business world, WCW didn't make enough money. Gone. Sold for pennies on the dollar. How many businesses, how many restaurant chains, how many publishers? Oh my God, so many publishers. Imagine you'd bought a subscription that all this was available with when CrossGen came out. And CrossGen had a thing where you pay a certain amount and you've got access to every CrossGen book that they print. Then when the company goes under, gone, and you basically were just renting those comics. The Stan Lee line, where, digital comics are like digital booths. Sometimes you want something in your hands. And there are a lot of people who, to them, having the book in their hands matters. For me, I like the omnibuses and hardcovers and trade paperbacks to have that feel. And also, so I could sit out on my deck, and whether it's sunny or cloudy or whatever, I can go to the park and read. I have a mix of digital and physical. It's the same way with books. I love going to a used bookstore and digging through to find stuff that's weird and out of print. And I have a love of the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s men's adventure novels and mystery novels and crime novels. That's sort of noir, sort of that noir crime stuff. And I can dig up and look for it on ebooks. But a lot of ebooks that I get now are either, stuff that I'm going to read and not care about. Review copies. Oh my God, I get so many review novels, even though we don't review novels on the podcast, but I read them. There are services out there for free ebooks, but I still like going to a used bookstore and, oh, cool. I didn't even know this book existed. Or you could look at the cover, or you could flip through. And yes, you could do that with an ebook, but it's not the same. Ebooks are more, especially e-comics are more, okay, this is proven. I can't flip through it. I can't kind of see if that's the sort of thing I want. I lean more toward digital. The way I buy comics now is I mostly buy digital, but I will pick up a hardcover or a trade paperback or whatever of something that I know I want forever. I think is the best way to put it. Because no one can come into my house and take away my Ultimates omnibus. So that's something I want there on a shelf so that I can take it down whenever I want. Digital is more, I'm just reading it. And I don't know if it's just me or if that's how most people see it. But for me, digital, I don't have a digital collection. Digital is just, I'm just reading it. What am I buying digitally? I am looking right now. Valiant put out a couple of big complete digital comic book collections. First is the original Valiant Classic. Everything Valiant ever published, well, other than the licensed books, are available on this jump drive. And normally, I'm not a huge Valiant fan, but I like the idea of, I can read the whole thing, and I was able to get it for like $30. Cool. And then company's entire output for $30. The new Valiant's one of those where it's like, okay, I hear this is good, but man, there's so much stuff you would have to jump into, and Valiant never really jumped out at me. They put out a second Valiant Complete Digital Comic Book Collection from 2012 to 2018. Same price, $30. Cool. If a company does something like that, I'm going to pick it up. Because that's something that, let's say I'm at work, I got my laptop, I just pop that in the laptop and just start reading. Or if I want to read on Valiant stuff, I can pop it in a laptop or my desktop computer. I have Marvel Unlimited. I adore Marvel Unlimited. It is the best of the services. It has a great interface. A great interface. It is easy to read. You can go page to page, panel by panel. Any of the old digital stuff that they added during that time is there. They have complete runs of so much stuff. They're adding older stuff all the time. As I record this, they recently completed Marvel 2-in-1, including the Doc Savage issue, which they can't reprint, but for some reason they can do it digitally. Iron Fist, it's in there. You name it, it's in there, including Golden Age stuff, Atomic Age stuff, the Atlas stuff. Most of the Atlas stuff that people care about, the monster comics, the horror comics, the war comic, Battlefield, the superhero books, were all printed in Marvel Masterworks. Well, they're all in Marvel Unlimited because they have to digitize those to make them the Marvel Masterworks. They even have some issues of stuff like Patsy Walker and Millie the Model and things like that. But once you get to Fantastic Four #1, they've got all of it. It's all there, and what's not there, they're still scanning and adding every week more books. But I cannot tell you enough how much I love that interface. Books are easy to find. You can look by creator, you can look by character, you can look by series. The only thing I don't like is when a book crosses over into other books, it doesn't, okay, you get to the end of this, it doesn't say, oh, here's the next in this story. It's, here's the next issue of this comic. I would like it if, okay, the next issue of this comic is here, but you could click here to get the next part of this big crossover. Honestly, that's how I read Secret Wars, because Secret Wars was one of those where it's like, okay, they are, basically, it's every Marvel comic's been ended. They're going to be continued in these mini-series. Oh, what a mess. I can't, I don't know what, okay. Then when it shows up in Marvel Unlimited, it's all there. So you're able to see, oh, okay, these are the place fillers, this is the good stuff, this is the stuff that directly ties in. The big crossovers, to me, that's the best way to read them. DC Universe. I have DC Universe. I don't use it as much because I don't like the interface. The searching is poor. It's very easy to tell that this is a streaming service that has some comics. They've got huge gaps in the series they have. Nothing is complete. There are times where it's like, okay, I want to read the Alan Moore Swamp Thing. And when they first started it, it's like, okay, here's issue, here's like at first, here's 5 issues and then a gap, and then, oh, here are the Crisis tie-ins and then a gap. And they still don't have Alan Moore's first issue. Everybody has 21, Anatomy Lesson. But Alan Moore wrote issue 20, which wrapped up all the previous plot threads from the Marty Pasco series and set everything up for Anatomy Lesson. And it's an excellent comic as well. Anatomy Lesson is so big because it changed everything. But the issue before was just as good. The interface is poor. Finding stuff is hard to do. Turning pages isn't that good. Sometimes the reproduction isn't that good. And you have to, I've got a really big tablet, and there are times I have to go panel by panel because it's, wow, they scanned this at a lower DPI or something. It's just not easy to read. They don't have a set schedule like Marvel Unlimited. Marvel Unlimited, it's every Monday there are new books, and they're from this many weeks ago. Whereas DC, it's, oh, we're adding 10,000 books this month. Here's some of the new 52, but not all of it. Here's some of this, but not all of it. Here's this miniseries, but none of the tie-ins. It's a little jumbled. There is a new one available called Graphics, and that is a ad-supported service that has indie books, webcomics, manga. The selection is leaning more and more toward mostly manga and webcomics, but they do have stuff like Irredeemable and let's see, I'm reading Klaus on it, the Santa Claus story by Grant Morrison that kind of gives Santa Claus's origin. A lot of webcomics. It's a good service to have, especially because it doesn't cost anything to explore books. I wish they would get more indies of a higher quality. The manga I don't know enough about, so it's like, oh, okay, I've heard of this one. Maybe I'll read that. Webcomics are webcomics. I haven't heard anything about webcomics, honestly, since Mark Waid's Thrillbent died. And I think that the whole webcomics thing has kind of evolved into its own little weird subgenre that doesn't go anywhere. There was a time when I thought webcomics were going to be huge, but no one has been able to figure out how to make a living at it. And when Mark Waid isn't able to make a living at it, it's pretty clear that it's going to be a hobbyist niche thing, except for a very few people who can figure out some way to make a living at it. Amazon has sales on digital comics from time to time, and oh my gosh, is it crazy. Like this week, they had a bunch of Marvel Epic books for $2.99, $3.99, and $4.99. Yes, they're available on Marvel Unlimited, but still, it's like, oh, okay, these Marvel Epic books, which are 500 pages with complete stories and everything for $5.99 digitally. You know, if you want to just, because I used it to pick up some Avengers books of runs that I really, really enjoyed. And I can read that through, my Amazon. Actually, I can read it through my Kindle. Comixology has sales every so often. I also, any free comic that's available on Comixology, it's usually a promotional book or first issue. I'm going to grab that so I can get an idea of what is this series about. Is it something I'm interested in? Another thing is, if you have Amazon Prime, you're able to borrow books. You can borrow graphic novels. There are graphic novels involved in that Amazon Prime, and Kindle Unlimited has a lot of comics as well. I don't take advantage of Kindle Unlimited because I have so much stuff to read already. The last thing I need is unlimited novels. I barely get through the novels I can borrow on Amazon Prime. But that is available as well. And then there are all sorts of public domain sources. I would start with the Internet Archive. They are probably your best source for public domain anything, because they are highly researched. They have people on staff who make sure that the stuff they say is public domain is actually public domain. And those would be the places that I would go to get your digital books. Also, like I talked about, every so often you get a physical version of digital books. The Completely Mad DVD, I don't know if it's even out of print, but pick that up because it's basically the first, it's every issue of Mad up till I think 96 or 97. So you've got all of the comic, all of the Harvey Kurtzman issues, all of the issues edited by Al Feldstein. All of the classic stuff from the 60s, 70s, into the 80s. I didn't care as much for the stuff from the 80s and 90s, but maybe you did. Maybe you grew up with it. But still, you've got, classic artists. You've got Al Jaffe, you've got Dave Berg, you've got Dick B. DiBartolo writing, you've got Sergio, you've got all Jack Davis, you got all this wonderful stuff. Usually, if you can find the DVD, it's on discount. I wouldn't pay extra for it, but yeah, it's just fantastic. That Star Trek DVD that I talked about earlier on, that's a great collection, and you're not going to find that stuff anywhere else. If you want to get the Gold Key stuff, it's been reprinted, but usually it's reprinted poorly because it was originally printed poorly. The Marvel stuff, I think they've put some of it in print. The DC stuff's not in print anywhere. And it was, while they have some trade paperbacks of some story arcs, it was a comic series. So it was back when, yes, each issue had a story, but there were continuing subplots and stuff that ran through. And just an excellent way to get that. And also, you can buy digital collections on Amazon or Comixology. But those are the ones that I use. Speaking of being used, here are some people who won't use you. Our sponsors. Normally in this space we have advertising, but for the rest of the year, in the spirit of giving, instead we're giving our advertising time over to fundraisers to help people who are in need. And the best place to help comic book creators who are in need is the heroinitiative.org. The Hero Initiative raises money and helps creators with medical issues, finding work, fighting homelessness. These are comic creators who may be switching careers, may have fallen on hard times, or they may have worked in the business for a long time. And as you know, comic book companies, everything there is you're paid by the page. It's not a salary, it's not benefited, it's not with a retirement. So this is how we can help the creators who've made our lives better by their work. Head on over to the heroinitiative.org in order to donate or buy items. Artist Tom Lyle, who drew tons of comics over the years, including a run on Spider-Man during the Spider-Clone saga, helped create the Tim Drake Robin, passed away recently, leaving his spouse with medical bills. You can donate by going to GoFundMe.com and looking up Tom-Lyle to donate to help pay off those medical bills from his hospital stay. If you are a wrestling fan, you know who ODB is. ODB is a Minnesota gal who got out of wrestling and got into the food truck business. One morning she woke up and her food truck had burned to the ground. She is running a fundraiser at Indiegogo. So go to Indiegogo.com, put in Help ODB Get Cooking Again, and you can purchase her wonderful sauces, autographed pictures. All funds go toward helping her buy a new food truck so she can start her business again. These are people who need your help. If you know someone who needs help or has a fundraiser, please let us know by sending an email to solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com, subject advertising. And after the first of the year, when we get back to regular ads, you can buy an ad too. Again, it's solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com, subject advertising. Thanks. And I do not only this podcast, but tons of other podcasts, and here's me talking about them. The Solitaire Rose Radio Network has all sorts of podcasts for you. There's, of course, Crazy Comics and Stories, where myself and Crazy Joe Ryder get together once a week to talk comics. We review comics, we talk about upcoming comics, we talk about comics history. Anything that has to do with comics, we're going to talk about. We also have Series in Review, where we review series and kind of give a DVD commentary of past comics that we've enjoyed. There is also Solitaire Rose Radio. Solitaire Rose Radio is my solo show where I discuss upcoming comics, past comics, comics history, and interview comics creators. These are all at crazycomics.solitairerose.com. There's also the podcast I'm proudest of. That's Novelcast, where I take the novels that I have written and turn them into audiobooks. That's at novels.solitairerose.com. Over at Bad Advice, myself, Dan Moore, and Wolfie B. Bad take your questions and give you bad advice. It's at badadvice.solitairerose.com. Now, don't think that I'm doing all the podcasts, because there's also Scrabbling Across the West by Dave Coffell and Stephanie Coffell. Dave is a musician and Stephanie is his wife. They travel the country performing music and playing Scrabble over at scrabbling.solitairerose.com. And finally, the newest member of the Solitaire Rose Radio group, that's Fantastic Forecast, where myself and host of For the Love of Comics, Adam Vermillion, go over the series The Fantastic Four, 4 issues at a time. That's available at fantasticforecast.solitairerose.com. If you would like to advertise on any of these podcasts, you can. Just email me at solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com. Thanks. Now, since Joe's not here, we're not able to ask him what's going on the eBay, so instead, it's my favorite part of the show. No, not where I revel in the fact that Joe hasn't interrupted me once. No, it's freaking and geeking. There is actually not a lot I am freaking about this week. I'm freaking about the fact that Joe and I weren't able to put together any time to record. Part of that's my fault, and part of that is him going back to work. But really, comic-wise, there's not a lot I am freaking about. I haven't read any news that has made me go, oh my gosh. So let's get into the fun part. Let's get into geeking. Marvel has announced a partial slate of their omnibuses are being released this year, and they're going back to press on a lot of the ones that have gone out of print and are super expensive, such as the Infinity Gauntlet. I wasn't able to find that for less than $800 or $900. They're going to be reprinting that one. The new printing of the Eternals doesn't just have the Jack Kirby 20 issues, 19 issues, and an annual, but it also has the Eternal stories that came after that. It's basically reprinting all the Eternal stuff up to the Neil Gaiman stuff. So don't pay $1,200 for that omnibus. Just wait till it comes out, and it'll be your regular $100 or $150. I have been reading a lot of cool stuff. The new run of Spider-Man by Nick Spencer. I know a lot of people were soured on him after Secret Empire, but he really gets Spider-Man, and he especially gets Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. He's made the comic fun. With Dan Slott, his comic was fun, but he got into that thing where he had to keep upping the game. He had to keep upping okay, how can I top that? How can I top that? How can I top that? Which is a problem that some comic series have. Nick Spencer isn't doing that. How can I top that? Because he's telling stories using the Spider-Man villains and making them the fun and interesting part, as well as, all the stuff going on with Peter Parker's life. It's just a fun comic. One of the things that's always made me happy about Spider-Man is it's a soap opera. And Nick Spencer has the soap opera part down. The other thing I'm geeking about is that for all this talk of comics are dying, I should actually do a segment of comics are dying. New Kid, written and illustrated by Jerry Craft, won the Children's Literature Prize Newbery Medal. The Newbery Medal goes to children's literature, so this isn't a comic book prize. This is a literature prize. Also, The Undefeated by Kwame Alexander and illustrated by Kadir Nelson won the Randolph Caldecott Medal. And for those of you who go, it's just awards for people giving awards because people like awards. No, this is actually used by librarians and booksellers to go, oh, this is the good stuff. And I'm going to keep pointing this out because I still remember when I was in high school, I asked if they would get, any of the comics books that were being printed, like Origins of Marvel Comics, the DC Superman from the 30s to the 70s, things like that. And I was told, no, comic books aren't we're not going to have comic books in libraries. And getting comic books into bookstores was not the easiest thing in the world. Even when Marvel reprinted the early Marvel stuff in those pocket books, that was more for like newsstands and stuff. You'd go to a bookstore and ask, they would special order it, but they would always kind of, oh really? You're buying that? And I think a lot of comic fans forget that for the longest time, basically from the creation of comic books until like the mid-90s, comics were looked down upon as trash for illiterates. When you watch old movies or old TV shows, the way they show that someone is either stupid or immature is have them read a comic book. Now, comic books are just books. And I will never stop pointing out how cool that is because so many creators fought so hard to have that happen. Think of all the stuff in the 70s and 80s that should have been in bookstores that just kind of got ignored because, well, it's a comic book. Even though you had people like Jim Starlin and Howard Chaykin and Jack Kirby and Will Eisner and others just doing excellent work that should have been considered literature at the time. It's now considered literature. But at the time it was, oh, that's that comic book trash. So there you go. we have completed this fill-in about digital comics. Next week, Joe will be back. He said that he wants to do an episode about the eBays, so it might be another episode where I get to nap. So, as we say every week, the comic we like the least, we still like better than the comic that you like the most. Hit my music.